Every week we do a Q&A with interesting and accomplished members of the adaptive community to find how they persevered, how they innovated, how they built communities, and how they found solutions. Welcome to the NametagsChat podcast. Welcome to the NametagsChat podcast. Today we are talking with Stan Clawson, a good friend for a long time. He's an artist. He's a filmmaker. He is a Burning Man aficionado. We will get into that. He is a professor. He was the student body president back in high school, which I think is pretty important too. But Stan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's good to see you again.
How did I not mention your mustache when I was introducing you? The best mustache we've ever had on the show by far.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. I grew it for this show. I want you to know it took me a long time, a lot of cultivation. It's like a bonsai tree. It doesn't just happen overnight. You know, it's a
What is a long time? Seriously, like how long does it take you to grow that mustache?
I think it takes me probably longer than some people because I just don't have that really thick hair like you do. I don't have that luscious Waddell locks. So it takes me, I think this has taken me about 2 months. And there's a lot of patience there, but I love it. And this actually, the first time I ever grew a mustache and decided to turn it into a handlebar was about 10 years ago. And really it came from just being lazy. And at some point, somebody said, you know, you could probably put wax in that thing and have a pretty decent handlebar. So I had to track down wax, and I found Wild Bill's XXX mustache wax. And I don't know if you can still find that. You had to get it on Etsy. And they sent it to me. I put it in, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So you weren't going for a particular look when you developed this mustache?
Not at all. No, I was just happy to have facial hair at that point in my life because it took me forever to get anything other than the Shaggy patch, right? Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. I could never get facial hair. And that was always, I don't know, I always felt sort of robbed, follically robbed. And so when I could finally get it, and when this happened, it was like, whoa, this is a thing. And so I don't know, I've just sort of stayed on the mustache train. Sometimes I cut it and then I feel really bad. And so I grow it back and then I get tired of it and I cut it. So it's a process. It's a very love-hate relationship. But
do you get when people are like, oh, it's that guy, you know, is it that guy in the wheelchair or is it that guy with the handlebar mustache?
I don't know. Sometimes they'll bring up the mustache. A lot of times they'll bring up the eyebrows. I get that a lot. I don't know what that's all about. Maybe I have very expressive eyebrows. But yeah, I'll get the guy in the chair, the guy with the mustache, the guy with the voice, the guy who sounds like Putty from Seinfeld, or the latest is the guy who looks like David Harbour. So I had to.
You're gonna have to explain my ignorance here.
Exactly. I had to actually look at, well, I was aware of who he was, but I was like, David Harbour. And they're like, you know, the sheriff from Stranger Things. And I went, oh, okay. And I don't really watch Stranger Things, but I get that a lot. They're like, oh, you look like David Harbour. And now he's been in a few other things. And so I'm okay with that. My mom thinks I look like Ted Cruz.
Well, you definitely have a better haircut. So
yeah, but I get weird things. I've had maybe mostly from my mom, I guess. I don't mean to paint a bad picture of my mom. I love her dearly, but they think I look like Ted Cruz. They think I look like Ricky Gervais. I'm not saying that he's unhandsome, but you know, come on. You want to get you look like George Clooney. You look like
Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt, Chris Helmsworth, or Chris Waddell, right? I want those kinds of compliments. That's what I need.
Does this get to be an artistic expression? I mean, you've been an artistic guy for a long time.
Yeah.
Does the mustache kind of come together and say, this is an expression of who I am and what I do?
I sometimes wonder if that's the case. I like to be a little different. I've always been different. I've never really fit into any mold. And so, for me to just rock the mustache, I feel like that's just my way of just doing something. And I also feel like my face looks better with it on. And when I get rid of it, it actually, I don't know, it makes my face look weird. And maybe that's because I've had it for so long. It makes my mouth look small for some reason. Isn't it weird how we perseverate on those facial things that nobody else would recognize? But it's like, wow, yeah. I mean, if I don't have a mustache on, it's really, it's pretty scary. It's a lot like when you meet somebody and they're wearing their face mask during the pandemic, and then they take the mask off and you're like, whoa, I did not see that coming. And not in a bad way. It's like, oh, you think in your mind something works and then it doesn't. So I'm really throwing shade on looks tonight. I don't mean to do that at all, by the way.
I'm leading you down this path, so I apologize.
Yes, he's so judgmental. That's Stan Clawson. He's an awful human being.
Once you get a mustache, then you're looking down on everybody else, is really what it comes down to.
Oh, I wish, but I've seen some very glorious mustaches that I aspire to have that kind of furry lip. So I don't know. We're talking a lot about the mustache.
We're talking a lot about the mustache. And you know what? I have a follow-up to that, because you're talking about the ones that you aspire to.
Yeah.
Do you have a top few mustaches? Is it like the Tom Selleck? Is it?
Yeah, I mean,
are you a pencil thin guy?
Yeah, like the John Waters. Not so much a John Waters. I would say, I mean, I think we all see those mustaches that we kind of admire. The Selleck is a classic. I mean, you can't go wrong with Magnum PI. I mean, it's one of the best. I mean, if we're talking about the Everest of mustaches, probably Sam Elliott.
How can you go wrong? And the mustache works with the voice and
yeah, the way he talks, everything he does. It's there. So maybe that's what I aspire to. But his isn't a handlebar. It's just this really rugged, bushy Western mustache. It's fantastic.
It kind of hangs off and it's all white now. And I mean, this is the Coors guy. So this is the way you have to look if you're going to pitch Coors beer, I think, is what it comes down to.
I guess so. That's true. Yeah. I didn't think about that. A future in slinging alcohol. Okay. I'll think about that.
Get some headshots.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, so one of the things that you worked on a while ago, and this is a complete departure from the mustache, was with Jeff Rosenbluth. You did 28 sports in 28 minutes called Continue. And you were the director of this. So what was the impetus behind that? And actually, what did it do? I
mean, Continue was one of my fondest memories. It was the idea really started when I first visited Jeff Rosenbluth, who's my spinal cord physiatrist. And I think I went in to an appointment to just a basic checkup. And he was the new doctor. He had just replaced the old physiatrist up at the University of Utah Hospital. And so I went in and, we had the checkup and he asked me, what I did for a living. And I said, oh yeah, well, I'm getting into video production. I was pretty early on in my career in doing production. And he said, oh, that's, it's really interesting because I'm kind of into video too. And when you're done, you should, I'll show you my editing setup. And I thought that was kind of strange because usually the doctor comes in and then they sort of leave. And that's about all you get, right? But with Dr. Rosenbluth, with Jeff, he invited me to his office and he had, these monitors and this editing, this like digital editing station. And I said, yeah, that's great. I said, it would be, and I think we started to talk about, doing a collaboration. I remember leaving thinking that was the strangest doctor-patient encounter I'd ever experienced. And then the next thing I know, we were having conversations, and we said, it'd be really interesting. Like we should really make something for rehab patients, for those who are in, who've just had a spinal cord injury. Something that they can watch that gives them a sense of what's available to them. And so we conceived of the idea of what would be continue. And we wanted just a really nice video that showcased all of the adaptive sports and recreation that was available to individuals with spinal cord injury. That started in about 2003. So we worked on that and finished that in 2009. So
wow.
For that long, we were taking our time, trying to figure out what was going on. Technology even advanced as we were actually filming it, to the point where now we were exploring HD and different cameras. And so we went all across Utah. I think there were only a couple of out-of-state activities, one of them scuba diving. And it was really important that we told that story, and that video then went to rehab centers all across the United States. And I think it was a really great opportunity to showcase that and that comprehensively. So a lot of times when you see adaptive sports or adaptive recreation films, it's usually just one activity. It's a skiing film, or it's somebody doing something. It's surfing. But we actually did 28 activities, and we really tried to string it together in a way that was that looked good, that felt good, that had sort of this beautiful continuous flow through it. And I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of it. You were in it.
I was in,
and several other people were in it, and so it's a great time capsule. Also, looking back on it to think about, I'll be able to look back at all the people who were a tremendous influence on me and my life after my spinal cord injury. And so that film is always going to be this beautiful piece that I'm really proud of. And we had talked about a sequel. And what I had wanted to do was a sequel that focuses more on higher injury levels. So adaptive recreation for higher injury levels, because I think that's a population that, often doesn't really get addressed in the sporting world. And yet there's so many great opportunities coming up. And so part of that is also a document of the technology that is becoming available to different mobilities, and I think it's really exciting that more and more people have the technology to get out and recreate and play sport.
Well, you're hitting on a lot of different things as you're talking about, right? So 28 sports, 28 minutes. You shot it mostly in Utah. If people watch television, they see a lot of Utah in the commercials, right? Because it is one of the most spectacular backdrops. You had spectacular backdrops, but then also we're talking about the rehab center at the University of Utah, which is an unknown gem in some ways. It is on par with Shepherd and with Craig, and it is one of the most progressive units in the world. But when you went through, how much did you know about sport, right? You had a rappelling accident, right? How much did you know about what you might be able to do?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I didn't know much about disability when I was injured. So when I was 20 years old, I fell in a rock climbing accident. I fell about 49 feet, landed on my back, and complete spinal cord injury at the T9-10 level, which is also the name of my production company.
Notice that, yes.
And when they brought me to in ICU and told me I was paralyzed, my first thought was, well, you know, what do I think about disability? You know, what are my thoughts about paralysis and disability? Now, a year earlier, Christopher Reeve had been paralyzed. So I was very aware of paralysis, but I didn't really have a lot of exposure, and I would say a lot of positive exposure to the world of disability. It was in many ways unknown and kind of taboo. And so I wouldn't say that I had a really great opinion of disability, but immediately I knew that I needed to change that myself. I needed to recontextualize what disability meant. And so part of that was trying to think about, well, what are the opportunities available to people with disabilities, you know? And do you just, you know, wheel around and, you know, with a blanket over your legs and just kind of exist? I didn't know. I really didn't know.
Which is the position that you're making this film for people who are in the same position that you were, right? Like, okay,
exactly.
every door is closed to me, and you're like, no, doors are open, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a life-changing thing. And so your first thought is, what can I do? What am I still able to do? And so I remember there was one moment that was really powerful, and that was I was already on the rehab floor, and I was at LDS Hospital, and I remember that a man from the National Ability Center, whose name was Mark Stevens, and Mark Stevens had paralysis, and he worked for the National Ability Center, and he would go around and talk about what the National Ability Center was and what activities they provided. And so I remember he came to do a little in-service at the hospital, but I was so exhausted that day. I just had, you know, a pretty intensive rehab session. And so I went back to my room. I'm like, I just can't do it. I'm so exhausted, but maybe I can meet with him some other time. And so I took a nap. Mark Stevens waited around until I was ready to wake up. And then he came in and he showed me this VHS video about the National Ability Center and what they did. And it just was like a light went off. It was a glimpse into my new world. It was a glimpse into possibility. And the fact that he took the time to stick around to relay that information. And the information is power. And I will never forget that. He has since passed, but he was actually involved in my first outing with the National Ability Center, and that was learning to water ski. And he was the boat driver. And so I have he really was that early mentor and really my first introduction to the world of adaptive recreation. So we just wanted to make a better video and make it more inclusive of everything that was available. And obviously that we missed some things. You know, we didn't include things like fencing or you know, there's certainly a number of things that people are doing now, but we wanted to get the basics. And it was also important that we didn't just focus on team sport or elite sport, because we know that a lot of people may not be elite athletes, right? There might be people who just are interested in getting out and riding a bike or getting out and fishing, right? So we really wanted it to cover multiple aspects of sport and recreation and leisure.
And it'd be really appropriate if you did a sequel, because the University of Utah has been on the cutting edge, right? I mean, they have a ski that allows super high quads. I mean, you talked about like Christopher Reeve, if he were still around, could ski in this ski with almost no mobility. I mean, it goes all the way up to like what they call sip and puff wheelchairs, right? Where you're just sucking air in basically in like a straw and blowing it out, to maneuver the chair, that's a chair. This is a ski that you're out in the elements, and not only a ski, but they have a sailboat too, right? So it would be really exciting to see, because some of it for me, and I don't know if this is for you, is the surprise, the unexpected, right? That they see you or they see somebody who's in a sip and puff wheelchair, and suddenly that person is the best sailor on the lake because that person knows how to sail, but doesn't have any, physical dexterity at all, really, but through the technology has the ability to do it. Is it going to happen? Are you going to do the sequel?
We keep talking about it, so who knows? Maybe when the anniversary hits, maybe in 2028, we'll do it, because the technology has changed a lot since since the video came out. Not a lot. I mean, there are certain things about some of the off-road cycles and the mono skis that are similar, even though the technology has changed. And I remember even talking to Muffy Davis about this. She's like, yeah, some of the equipment in that video is a little outdated. And I was like, I know, but a swimming pool is a swimming pool, right? So but this is an opportunity to really focus more on showcasing that technology. And what you bring up is really interesting, because I think about how important technology is in the lives of people with paralysis, right? You've certainly seen technology change over the course of your life in a chair. I have. And I think about just how much more mobile or less mobile I am, depending on how that technology is designed to work, right? Thinking about the old aluminum chairs versus the titaniums that are coming out now. There are changes in technology that really allow people to be more functional. And I think talking about that in the context of a wheelchair is really important, because I certainly wheel better when I have better equipment, right? And then when we talk about the Tetra ski, which is that sip and puff or joystick controlled ski that the University of Utah developed, that technology can now create independence for an entire group of people who couldn't even think about getting on the ski hill until now. And they're able to do it. And not only are they able to do it, this isn't just isn't that nice? Isn't that great that they can do that thing? Which I can't stand the charity model, right? That drives me up the wall. No, they're competing. So last March, they had their first competition. They need to get down the hill. And guess what? If their time isn't as good as somebody else, they don't place. And I love that, because what it is saying is, yes, we have now created the tools for you to actually function. So do it. Go do it. This isn't just a gimme. This is actually independence and competition.
Legit competition
That's never been seen before.
Well, I mean, so much of what you're talking about is what we're hoping for as human beings in general, right? It becomes more necessary the more profound the injury. The technology can help, but we're all looking for that opportunity to perform, that opportunity to struggle, that opportunity to be successful, that opportunity to effectively be human. And the technology is enabling these people. Where do you see that going? Because in some ways, it's kind of, it's gone into a direction that I didn't think it would go. So then you think the next part, but then for you as a storyteller, what's the story around that, especially looking at the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there are many stories. I think the biggest story is, what are humans capable of, right? It always starts there. And I think we always surprise ourselves. But then when you start thinking about the technology and what is being done to help us advance, to move that needle forward, right? You know, we could look at landing on the moon and what was accomplished there through technology and teamwork. So now we're able to bring that down to earth. And I have no concept of what technology will do, other than I think what we will start to see is more activities and more terrain becoming accessible. And I think you will begin to see that not only in technology that allows people to now go backpacking, to go backcountry, to go on these backcountry terrains, but also potentially to be able to navigate urban environments that aren't that accessible, to be able to navigate stairs, to be able to navigate, you know, houses that still have a step. I think we're going to start to see that demand for that technology that allows people to be as independent as they possibly can be. And then I think as part of that, what I really hope happens is that we are also seeing a system in place that doesn't make that cost prohibitive. And I think right now we're starting to see a lot of great organizations like Trails, like the National Ability Center, like Wasatch Adaptive Sports, and that's just locally, but you know, of course, nationally, internationally, these organizations that are coming together to provide these opportunities, to provide this technology, to get you independent, to get you out there, to teach you the skills you need so that you can build a foundation and then grow from there. But then it would be great to be able to hop on Amazon and go buy a new bike and have it be affordable with one click, just like everybody else, right? That to me is the dream, because I think what's happening right now is it's very expensive to have a disability, and it's very expensive to be paralyzed. And so what we need to do is to figure out ways where you aren't being financially punished just because you have a disability, right? How do we create that equity in sport, in recreation, in adaptation? And then down the road, I mean, I'm also thinking about universal design and the implications of how do we just create more accessible spaces so that it isn't dependent on technology to have to get me in and out of a building. It isn't my problem that I have to figure out, right? It is society basically saying we need to make some systemic changes so that people can get in and out of these buildings no problem. Look at Star Trek. The Enterprise is 100% wheelchair accessible. And if you look at the Next Generation, they've got these two beautiful ramps that go right down to the captain's chair, fully wheelchair accessible, right? Every door. And we look to Star Trek as the end all be all of where we can go, not only as human beings, but also with technology.
It's technology, but it's also, I mean, this is art though, too, isn't it? I mean, this is fitting into a space the way that it's supposed to fit. It's supposed to fit our lives. It's supposed to fit our eye, too. Is that a challenge, or is that a driving force?
So now when you talk about art, are you talking about the art of architecture or the art of universal design, or are you talking about the art of just technology in general?
I mean, I'm talking about all of it, really. I think that it really is the whole, because I mean, technology, it's so easy to have the two things being separate, right? Technology is sort of this left brain science, but then there has to be that intuitive side, doesn't it? That's shaping that science and is looking at nature as well, saying, okay, are we creating something new, or are we trying to learn from what surrounds us to create something that's better for us based on something that has a better design. Just, I mean, you talk about the golden ratio, you talk about a variety of different things. I mean, the length from your elbow to your hand is like the same as your foot, right? Like we're put together in a symmetrical kind of way. And creating our world that way is both technologically advanced and artistically advanced. How do you look at the shaping of that within and your role of shaping it?
I'm going to try to answer a few of those. I think when we look at, and as you were talking about the golden ratio, and as you were talking about arm length, my first thought was of the Vitruvian Man, right? The classic Da Vinci Vitruvian Man, this idea of body and space, right? And how we navigate through body and space. I think when it comes to my role, if I can be a voice for change, if I can be a voice, whether just in person or through film or through teaching or through any type of activity, if I could be a vehicle for change that brings more awareness to disability and all of those components that are included in that, from community to technology, hopes, dreams, interests. I think that's where I will contribute the most, because I think there are a lot of people who have really great ideas, and we need to showcase those, and we need to highlight those, and we need to let people know what's happening. Not only those individuals who have disabilities, but also everybody in their community, all of the people who have the power to really make the change. So that's where I see myself being useful. From an artistic standpoint, it's interesting because I certainly have done a lot of consulting work and have worked with people.
I mean, you worked with the organizing committee in 2002, right? To bring the Olympics and the Paralympics here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with Sundance, and I've worked with even just local organizations to help create some accessible experiences. About several months ago, I worked with the Utah Arts Alliance to help create, in a way, a wheelchair accessible ball pit for kids and for people to get into. A work in progress, but who would have ever thought about doing an accessible ball pit area? We look at that and we go, oh, well, I guess if you can't jump or you can't, how do you, what, right? It's like, well, there should be no reason whatsoever why we can't do that. And it just takes the right people getting together, the will, the interest, and then making that a priority. And I think it starts with making things a priority and saying accessibility is a priority, disability is a priority. And when we create inclusivity, that's going to benefit everybody. So as far as how things look, how they function, well, I think about the idea of how do you make the wheelchair more and more sleek and sexy, right? There's no reason why we can't approach wheelchairs like we've approached cars, right? How do we make them more efficient? But how do we make them look sexy? How do we make them actually look kind of cool? So that might be an advancement that we begin to see, where we're actually making lighter and lighter, sturdier chairs that showcase more of the individual and still function better and better and better as they progress with each new version. And I think a lot of that just comes from us getting out and being visible. One of the things that I don't know if you encounter this at all, but you go out and you often find that you're the only guy who looks like you when you go out to restaurants. You don't really see a lot of other individuals in chairs. And why is that? And I think about that a lot. And I'm sure there are many reasons for that. But I've always learned, and I always made it a priority, that I was going to get out there. I was going to be very public. I wanted to go out and do things publicly. I wasn't going to hide my disability. I wasn't going to, stay inside. And that's not to say that that's an easy decision for people. Certainly people have many reasons why they don't want to go out, why they don't want to engage. I mean, we just had a great pandemic where I definitely stayed indoors more than anybody else I knew. But if I can, I'm always trying to get people to get out, because when you engage in the world sees you, and that's where ideas happen. And that's where you begin to bounce ideas off of each other, right? You got to be the pinball. You got to pop up, you got to roll out, and you got to bounce around things. You got to make some noise. And that's how we begin to advance. And that's how places begin to become more accessible. And that's how technology begins to improve. And because people are getting out, they're needing to get out. And it only takes a chance encounter between two people to suddenly launch an adaptive sport or an organization, or to create a new piece of technology that will forever change the way people ski down a hill.
It's totally true. And you're hitting on some really great stuff there too, like seeing the individual, but also you're hitting on the technology, which continues to change, right? I mean, you look at like the old photos of FDR, right, and he's in like a wicker chair with the big wheels in front and the small wheels in back, or maybe one wheel, and it's furniture as opposed to function necessarily. So much of that is about perspective, and your job as a filmmaker is about perspective, is about getting that shot that catches somebody's eye so that they see things differently, so they suddenly are drawn into the narrative. You also went from, being like 6 feet tall to like 4'10" kind of thing. You have an entirely different perspective as a result of being in a wheelchair. How much is that perspective something that is an advantage for you and something that you want to communicate?
Well, I mean, to start off with, I'm the filmmaker that shoots in all low angles, which is great because it puts everybody in the power position. So everybody seems powerful on screen. So that's the plus side of it. But honestly, I think there's something to be said about what having a disability and being a filmmaker has allowed me to do. And I think it does start with how we as individuals with disabilities see the world around us. I'm certainly a changed person because of my disability. I wouldn't change my accident for the world. What I have learned, what I've become as a result of that, has made me a person that I like a lot more than before my accident. That's not to say I was a bad person before my accident, but I was a person who didn't have a relationship with disability before my accident, and now I do. And that alone is a really powerful thing.
Let's expand that a little bit. Is it just disability? I mean, you were the kind of guy who got along with everybody, like in high school kind of thing, and you were outside but inside, that kind of thing. Does this enhance your relationships with sort of everybody? Is that what you're saying?
I think it did. I mean, I always got along with everybody. I was the kid in high school who I'd go hang out with the stoners. I'd go hang out with the goths. I'd go hang out with the grunge kids. I was with the drama kids. And then I jump over with the journalism kids, because I was doing the cartoons for the school newspaper. And then I could go hang with the jocks, and I could hang with everybody in between. And that was because I never identified as any one type of social group. Well, I think when I was injured, there certainly was this this area that I had not had a lot of interaction with, and that was the disabled community.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look back on it and I'm really real about it, I mean, I did feel very uncomfortable about that community. And I think it was just because of the way I saw people interact with it around me. You didn't talk about it, right? The few times that I had any interaction with disability, it was typically going to a care facility. And so immediately was institutionalized. And so I really had no idea of what disability really was. I mean, you could even say, okay, the difference between, you know, a developmental disability versus a physical disability. Well, now as I've learned more and more about these worlds and continue to learn about them, and to continue to learn about visible and invisible disabilities, of which there are many, I feel like I have a deeper understanding. And I think that understanding allows me to have a bit more empathy, and not just for people with disabilities, but I think with people in general. I think it allows me to go, I understand what it's like to go through a really difficult thing in life. I mean, I think we both do. I know what it's like to experience a challenge that is well, I mean, you could consider almost insurmountable. And so I think that allows me to have a better connection to human beings, because I don't really, you know, when I think about that low angle, the low angle in film, looking up puts the character who's on screen in the power position, because it puts you almost in the point of view of somebody who is below and looking up to. And ironically, I feel like when I approach people in documentary or anytime I'm working with somebody, they are in the power position. I want to learn from them. It's why I like documentaries so much. And I know there's a lot of ego in the world of filmmaking. It's part of that world that I really, really dislike. And so as a filmmaker, I am a learner. I am in your capable hands to document this story as truthfully as I can. You're the star. I'm not. I'm just the person who's going to kind of help put it together and collaborate and hopefully create something that will educate, entertain, and maybe move the needle forward. But I think being lower has given me this perspective that I otherwise maybe wouldn't have had. And I think it has helped me to check myself so that I don't have ego when I go into these situations. I don't feel better than anybody. I'm always amazed at everybody's story. And that, I think, has made me a better filmmaker, because I can find the most amazing things in human beings, even those human beings who feel like they don't have a story to tell. And I like that.
Well, in a lot of ways, it makes you a better storyteller, because you're relating to the subject in the way that they want to be seen. I was looking at your Instagram earlier today, and during COVID, you had an Instagram post with Stephen King's The Stand. I don't know if you read the whole thing, but at the beginning, it is those effectively like crazed serial killers who ended up in jail, right? And you think these are the worst versions of human beings possible, but yet they continue to have those redeeming qualities. I always felt like that King was writing about himself. Like each character was actually him. And he's like, yeah, this is all the bad stuff, but don't forget about this thing over here. And as you were talking about it, I couldn't help but bring the two of them together, this sense of the empathy to be able to portray the subject in such a powerful way, and in the way that is powerful for them. What's the biggest thing that you look at when you're creating a story, when you're following a subject? How does the story build for you?
I'm looking for the truth in the story. And I'm looking for, you could argue that there is no such thing, but I see a lot of filmmakers approach film from a very business-minded perspective, and I understand why that is, because they have to get the funding and they have to sell the tickets. But for me, I'm interested in the truth of the story, and I'm interested in specifically representing characters honestly.
How does that work with your truth? Are you open enough to be able to accept a truth that doesn't necessarily go through your filter? Is that the challenge?
I think that's the best part. Even if it makes me feel uncomfortable, even if it challenges what because at the end of the day, the reason I do documentary is to learn. I've never really been a narrative filmmaker, because with narrative filmmaking, you're writing the story, and so then you get the talent to conform to your already preconceived idea. You've already got it scripted and storyboarded and mapped out. And for me, it's the exploration. That's the journey. And so I may go into a piece with an idea, but the second it changes, it's wonderful, because now you sort of get to follow this journey that you could not have conceived of in pre-production. And it is playing out in the most wonderful way. And that's what we need. We don't need the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? We're already seeing that in Hollywood. How many times can you remake Halloween? They're going to try. But when you go out and have somebody tell you their story that is so unique to them, that is so new and so refreshing, you are now getting a new story, an original story, something that you couldn't have thought of. And that for me is the best part of the filmmaking journey, when you learn about something. And I'm sure you could potentially have that happen in narrative, but I think for me, being able to be surprised and being able to have that person lead the dance is the best part for me. And so again, you leave ego at the door. You go into a shoot, you go into a story, and it either happens or doesn't happen. I'll give you an example. I recently shot a piece for the city of Salt Lake. They do a mural fest every year. And as I'm shooting the muralists, every once in a while, a muralist will say, let me know if you want me to go over and paint a certain way or do a certain section for the film. And I look at them, I'm like, well, no, just do your thing and I'll capture it, or I won't capture it. And what it told me is that there are filmmakers out there who do like to manipulate. They're like, well, can you go over and do this and get this thing? And that's not the truth for me. That's not the truth for me. And so, and again, a lot of documentary filmmakers will say, well, there is no truth in documentary. And sure, I guess that's true. Anytime you point your camera on something, you are making a conscious decision. But I at least try to be a little truthful in my filmmaking. And so when I go out and I shoot muralists, I may spend an hour and a half shooting and I'll never get the shot. So I'll come back the next day and then I'll get the shot. But it'll be a truthful shot. It'll be what really happened. It won't be manipulated. It won't have my input. It will only maybe have my input when it comes to editing in post-production, how I see it fit into the story. But for me, that's important, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And the second I force it, there's something that's very disingenuous about the entire thing. It's almost like a house of cards that just completely comes down. And that's not why I do documentaries. That's not why I filmmaker.
Is that part of your attraction to the Burning Man art as well? I mean, this is leaving your ego at the door because it's so ephemeral, right? I mean, this is something that you work on and work on and work on, and then light on fire, or you know, effectively, like,
Right.
it's over.
Right.
It's something you've created that was in that moment. Is that the attraction for you? Is that an ultimate truth?
That's really interesting. Well, the Burning Man art for me was interesting because number one, it is like film, in the sense that it's very much a collaborative process at times. So you have people coming together, they have an idea, they have a blueprint, and they work together to create this piece of art for a 1-week run. And then they light it on fire and it is gone. It is transitive. It is not meant to be around. That's life.
Well, it's also, you don't possess the art, right?
It's exactly right. You that art no longer belongs to you. And I've always believed that with film as well. I believe that the second a film is released, it is no longer yours. I get into discussions about this with people with certain films that have had special editions, and that people are like, well, was it better? Was it worse? And I always come back to this idea that the second you release a film, it's no longer yours. You now have that relationship with the film. You remember going to that movie as a kid. It's yours. So when somebody decides to just suddenly change it, I always feel really bad about that, because it's almost like, well, that was my thing. That was, you basically like cut up my blankie and turned it into something else, right? And I think it's okay to release films. I think it's okay to release a film and you're not 100% okay with it. I think it's okay to release a piece of art that you're like, okay, it was okay. Because time does interesting things to art. Time does interesting things to film. Films that are considered awful today will down the road become masterpieces, right? Think about a movie like The Shining. The Shining got horrible reviews when it was released. Didn't make much money at all. The same thing with Blade Runner. Blade Runner, people said it was awful. And now both of those films are considered masterpieces. And I think both of those films even made it onto Sight and Sound, which is this, Sight and Sound is this big deal in the film community of critics. 100, I think every 10 years they release their 100 best films, and both of those films are in there. But at the time those films were made, people were just like, this is awful. Time does really interesting things. And so I think that's what's phenomenal. Think about something you've done, or, and 10 years later, you're like, actually, you know what, it's aged well. It's okay. It's not too bad. But the Burning Man art is interesting because, like, you let it go. You have to let it go. It is no longer yours. It is now everybody else's to interact with, to have that experience with, to commemorate the death of loved ones, to commemorate a birth, to commemorate, I'm thinking about the temple that they burn at the end of the week at Burning Man. And these are really powerful pieces of art that bring people together, and then they're gone. They're gone. And I say that it's like life, because we are the same way. We are these beautiful pieces of art, and we're only around for a limited amount of time, and then we're gone. So that idea, I think, is really fascinating to me. And I feel the same way when I talk about film and releasing it. For me, the best part of film is the journey. The second it's released, I'm thinking about the next thing that I want to do, the next adventure I want to go on, right? I don't really dwell on the work that's already been done. And it's kind of funny too, because, when you bring up something like a Continue, I'm like, yeah, I can't remember the last time I've seen Continue. But I have all of these really, really, really potent memories attached to it. And so, yeah, It's I think art is powerful in that it can create those feelings, and the creator can sort of let all of those interpretations and feelings belong to everybody else.
It's interesting that you talk about the memory, because it is such a visceral thing for us, isn't it? The way that we connect with art and what art means to us, and the artist never necessarily getting where they wanted. I mean, they talk about Picasso putting graffiti effectively on his paintings because he didn't think they were great, and we're like, no, that's pretty amazing, really. But it wasn't what he was going for, or the idea of, like, often talk about when you're writing a memoir that you write that part, and that locks in that memory, that's how it happened in your mind. But you're talking about something that's entirely different, in the sense of like the audience interacting and what we take forward. What do you take forward? Because I'd imagine you're an amalgam of so many ways of like all the art that you've been exposed to, but it's all the art that you've been exposed to, and yet there needs to be your voice. How do you take that forward and emerge your voice out of all of the influences that you've had?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. Well, if you ask me, I don't think that I have found my voice yet in my art form. Maybe other people say that they can tell my work, but I think I'm still finding my voice. And also, I'm okay if I don't have a voice. I am okay being the man behind the curtain. I am totally fine with people watching something and really enjoying it, and having it move them, and they not know who created it. I'm okay with that. I really am. I'm not in this for celebrity. I'm not in this to make, gobs of money. At the end of the day, I just want to create a beautiful piece of work that gets people thinking, that shows them something that they've never seen before. A lot of the more personal work that I've done really explores this idea of ability and differences, and I like that. I feel like that is a world that I am about to potentially maybe explore a little bit more. And that is something that's always been on my radar, which is this idea of, well, maybe not being the horror film director, but being a director who begins to look at ability and begins to look at the world of disability in a way that we've never seen before. Because let's be really honest, the way that disability is depicted in film needs a lot of work. It is happening. I mean, it's been.
Why does it need a lot of work?
It needs a lot of work because if we think about number one, how the go-to is still to hire non-disabled actors to play disabled roles. And not only do we do that, but it's considered this elevated thing, this way to get potentially an Oscar for your performance, playing somebody who is going through these challenges. That's going to get you your Oscar, right? Tropic Thunder has a full scene dedicated to that, and yet we continue to do that. And I've talked with actor friends who say, but yes, but isn't that an opportunity? I mean, shouldn't actors be able to portray, the roles of individuals with disabilities? And I go, well, I'm not opposed to that. Certainly some of my favorite movies have, if I think about a film like My Left Foot, it's an extraordinary film. Daniel Day-Lewis. When I was a kid, I saw the movie, and then I was probably, I don't know, 12 or something like that. And all of a sudden I saw him walk up to get his Oscar. And I was like, huh, well, that's interesting. That's not the guy. But I'm not opposed to that. What I'm opposed to is that it's the only thing that's really happening for the most part in Hollywood right now, is that we are not. And so where is the truth in the story? You are finding people telling stories that, number one, I don't think represent disability in the most truthful of ways. Number two, they're hiring non-disabled actors to portray those roles. And you're hearing an outcry in the disabled community. People saying, why do we keep doing this? Why are we perpetuating this modern idea of blackface? Is this something that is the only way that a film is going to get sold? And at some point, we have to really think about that. So I'd love to see a world where we're hiring disabled actors to play disabled roles. And then, yeah, every once in a while, we get a non-disabled actor to play the role of somebody who has a disability. That's fine. But until...
And can it go the other way, though?
Yeah.
Can you get a disabled actor to play the role of a, that was written for an able-bodied person, right? And they're not going to be able to play an able-bodied person necessarily.
Well, but why not? I think about the Super Bowl ad that came out where Christopher Reeve gets up and walks out of his wheelchair, and it blew everybody away. And they use technology and digital technology and put his head on somebody else. But there are potentially ways of doing that. The Farrelly brothers, who directed Dumb and Dumber and
Something About Mary, and
yeah, they have a really good friend who has been in several of their films. And I think in Kingpin, you see him in his wheelchair, but then in other roles, he's either driving a car or he's behind a desk. So he's presumably playing non-disabled characters. And I love that. It's like, oh, that's great. We've got Ali Stroker, who is just absolutely incredible. And I hope that she gets bigger parts. She had a couple of guest spots on Ozark. But again, the way that they shot it, I didn't feel like really showcased the fact that she uses a wheelchair. It's great. But we're getting there. I think we're starting to see a change in the way that cinema depicts disability. You think about 2020 with Crip Camp, and then Coda last year, and Coda won Best Picture. And Crip Camp was such a great film. And what I loved about it that I don't think anybody else noticed, and it's the only reason I watched the Oscars that year. I mean, I was definitely hoping that it would win Best Picture. It should have.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the first time that the Oscar stage had a ramp built for it.
Because you're walking up the stairs.
Always with the stairs, Hollywood and the stairs. So this is the first time, 2021, the first time that we actually see, I guess it would have been 2020, it would have been this year. 2021 for Crip Camp. That's the first time that we see a ramp up to the stage. So we have a long way to go in film, and we have a long way to go to tell authentic stories about disability. But we're seeing those, and we're seeing filmmakers who are doing some absolutely extraordinary stuff. And they're out there, and we have actors who have disabilities who want those roles. I mean, if we think about it, 26% of the population has some type of a disability, self-reported. Why aren't we seeing that on the silver screen? We need to be.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
I hope that would be the voice that I can potentially bring to the forefront. If not my own, then the voices of those honest depictions of honest people who look like us.
Well, we're going to have to bring you back, Stan, because this seems like a story that needs to be updated. So thank you for joining us today, but we will most definitely have you back to talk about more in the film, more disability in film, more truth in film, and more just people in film. I mean, it might be that we're separating the person from the disability, which sounds incomprehensible.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
Likewise.
And you know, maybe work on your mustache for the next time. I'm telling you, it's a golden ticket.
That would be a bit of work for me. I'll have to do it. Mine's a little bit more salt than pepper right now. So it's maybe I'm getting up to Sam Shepard though. Is that or Sam Elliott? Sorry.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the Sam Elliott, his is very salty as well.
It's the gold standard. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope that you've enjoyed it. We've had a great time. Please, the greatest compliment that you can pay us is to tell your friends. Tell your friends to tune in. When this becomes a traditional podcast, please like us, please follow us, and we will do our best to bring you great stories and great people. We'll see you next week.